attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the Buckeye Business Builders Monthly Lunch and Learn. I'm Kent Eiler with Eiler Networking and Computing, and we are your hosts for this event. We'll have a recording of this available on our YouTube channel as well, and you'll be able to revisit this if you have any questions in the future. So our mission at Buckeye Business Builders is to cultivate a dynamic and supportive business community in Northeast Ohio. We are committed to connecting local businesses, fostering valuable relationships, and providing opportunities for growth and success. Through networking, collaboration, and education, we aim to empower businesses and contribute to the economic vitality of our region. So we meet the second and fourth Tuesdays from 11:30 to 12:30 at the Northern Ohio Business Center. The sign says NOBC. The address is 5224 Cobblestone Road in Cobblestone Center there in Sheffield Village, Ohio. It's right across the parking lot from Sam's Club. So if you know where Sam's is, you'll be able to find us. If you'd like to attend, please fill out the Contact Us form on our website, which is bbbng.org. Let us know your name, company name, and what business category you'd like to fill, and we'd love to have you there as a guest. But today, our presenter is Adam Noll. Adam grew up in Northeastern Ohio and went to school at Ohio University. He graduated with a major in engineering and a minor in business. After graduating, he moved and lived in Ohio, and from Ohio to Chicago. Got a brother in the Chicago area as well through there, but he's no longer there. He moved back here to Ohio. There's some good wisdom in that, I think, but I don't know. Chicago's a great place to visit. I couldn't live there. But Adam started his career in the manufacturing field and continued that course. He met his wife there, got married, and then they moved back to Ohio in 2014. So once they came back to Ohio, Adam made a career change in the financial services industry. He wanted to make more of a personal impact with the world and be able to help individuals. He worked with insurance and investments at Prudential Advisors and then at Allstate as an exclusive financial specialist. An opportunity came up to take over an insurance agency in Avon Lake in 2022, and so he did. And now he runs the Adam Noll Agency. They've been operating that since October of 2022. And in that short time, they've been able to increase the business by over 30% and continue to serve their community with their focus on where coverage meets care objectives. Personally, he and his wife have been happily married since 2013 and have two wonderful children. So without further ado, here's Adam Noll.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kent. Thanks for the warm introduction. I appreciate it. A little bit more detail about it. We took over the agency side back, as Kent said, in October of 2022. So, our biggest driver of what we do is based off of where coverage meets care. Most people that do have their insurance policies typically don't understand why we have them, what they're there to cover, and making sure they have the right coverage in place. So with that, that's kind of a leeway into what we're going to kind of talk about, which is kind of the moniker is what is liability and why do we have it? So most people think of their liability coverage, mainly they associate it with their auto insurance. And so with auto insurance, there is a set limit that is required by the state. So there is a minimum amount that you are required to have for the state. And, as long as you have it, you're fine. The thing is most people don't understand why we have that limit and what it's there to protect. So liability is always there to protect you personally in case you hurt somebody else. So liability is for the other guy. But with that being said, it's also to protect you personally to make sure that all of the assets that you've accumulated through your life are protected. So as an example, most people in our area at least seem to carry a 100,000, 300,000 limit. So what that means is it's 100,000 per person, 300,000 per accident. And so what that means is if you are personally in an at-fault accident, so you rear end somebody and somebody has to go to the hospital, injured, hurt, surgeries, anything like that, the maximum amount of limit that would be paid out in that scenario is $100,000 per person per accident. So if there's only one person in the accident, the most amount of money that would be paid out is $100,000. And why that's important is is if you ever had a situation where personally you carried more you had more assets to yourself, there is a potential that anything above and beyond that liability limit that gets paid out from the insurance company would have to come out of your pocket. And that's kind of a scary thought. Now, in most cases, right, insurance, these situations don't happen with every accident, right? The accidents are exactly what they are. They're accidents. However, in catastrophic events, we want to make sure that you, our customers, are protected if something like that were to happen. So, it's just a big conversation of why we have liability and the importance of doing it. So I have this little, I'm a numbers nerd, so I apologize for those that aren't, but this is a way for me to put something tangible or intangible to be tangible. So it's this little calculator that we use to kind of figure out what is the proper coverage for you individually. So I'm going to make this up. Okay. So this isn't based off of anything, but this is just kind of a situation where we see. And so here at the top is your current liability limits. Where you can see this, most people will think of an auto that they'll be able to pull up their insurance card and they would see, the VIN number and everything else. And on it, it would show kind of deductibles and things like that. What we're talking about, though, is the liability limits that are there. And so as a refresher, liability limits are there to pay out in case you had hurt somebody. Okay. Most people carry a $100,000, $300,000 policy limit. So that's what this represents up here. Then the next question I have for most people is if you are a homeowner, what is the equity you have in your home? Usually this is what you think the house would be sold minus any liability. So think of a mortgage, and then that would be considered your equity. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, I have a $300,000 home market value, but I have a $200,000 mortgage. I would say I have $100,000 in equity in the home. Okay. Next, I look at my current belongings. So this is kind of, we call it our personal property. Think of it as all of the stuff in your house. You took your house, flipped it upside down, shook it out, whatever came out the windows would be it. So that's your furniture, your clothing, and things like that. For the sake of this, I just put 50,000. Some people may have more, some people may have less. For the sake of this, I'm just going to say $50,000. And then the last one, and this is the one that most people don't necessarily, at least in our industry, seem to talk about, is the monetary asset sort of thing. And why this is important is because this would be subject to litigation if it ever got to a point. And so from my perspective and our agency's perspective, we don't ever want you to take a single dime out of your pocket more than what you already are for paying for the insurance. So in this scenario, what this means is if all the monetary assets, so think if you have a 401k, you have an IRA, either in any investment accounts, checking and savings, if you put a bow around it and, put it all together, this is kind of the number that we would come up with. So for the sake of argument, I'm just going to keep it at $100,000. So what this is designed to do is you can see my total asset right now from this scenario is at $250,000. And why that's important is if I was ever in an at-fault accident where let's just say I rear-ended somebody, it was an accident, I wasn't paying attention, somebody was at a stoplight, I rear-ended them. Unfortunately, the person that I hit had to go to the emergency room, so they had a ambulance, ambulance ride. They missed work for 2 weeks. They had physical therapy and everything. All in, it was a $250,000 loss. Well, my insurance company is only going to pay the $100,000. And so with that, what we're saying is I would be liable to pay up to $150,000, because my limit only covered $100,000 of my $250,000 equity that I personally have. So it's my assets that I have, and therefore I could potentially have to pay $150,000. And so the scary thing is, and the question I ask most people and they don't like to answer is how did you want to pay it? Did you want to cut a check for $150,000? Did you want to put a lien on your home for $150,000? Or did you want to have your wages garnished for 25% until this $150,000 is covered? So those are nobody wants to, that's the question that nobody wants to have to answer. And so why this is important is the difference between 100,000, 300,000 versus maybe a $250,000, $500,000 in a grand scheme of things may literally be $5 more a month. And so it's a very low cost, but high return, high protection coverage that's available. It's just a matter of making sure we know what we need to protect and why it's there in the first place. And so those are those things that, whether it's with us here, whether it's with your current agent, it's just these conversations are so important to have because we have insurance for our worst days, not our best. And so the thing is 99% of the time, you're not going to be using the insurance, but that's why it's called insurance. We want to be prepared for that 1% that does happen. So we don't put your family and you personally in, a situation where you have to pay more money, pay money out of pocket for something that was an accident. It was never intentional. We never wanted that, we never want anyone to get hurt, but unfortunately, that's why it's called an accident. So that's kind of a very simple and easy kind of calculator that we use to kind of determine where certain things lie. But it's just, the other thing is, it's all personal, meaning every single person we talk to will have something different. Somebody may not own a home. And in that scenario, in the same situation, you can see it does change, but it doesn't mean that you may have the proper insurance as well. So the idea is we try to individualize all of our, conversations and things like that, because it is so important for us to individualize it because no person is exactly the same. So very high level kind of sort of thing that we talked about, but does anyone have any questions or anything?
So that's great information. And I mean, the spreadsheet, just seeing those numbers, it brings it really to life. Yeah. How do you want to, pay for the gap if you do end up having a gap? If you do have some questions, there's a little question mark box through there. I posted that in the chat earlier, but one question that came up, when you talk about liability, there are a lot of different types of coverage, but does liability cover like the replacement cost of a house?
Okay, great question. So liability is always for the other person. So that's typically in the event somebody is injured and has bills and things like that were associated with the injury in itself. Dwelling is separated, and that's really on the individual's home or property in that situation. So there's certain liability limits. We're talking in this situation, if these are personal bodily injury liability limits. There's also a property damage liability limits. There's a dwelling protection, which is then in the question you asked, that's more on the structure of the home. So those would be a little bit different. And each policy itself will have certain limits based off of whatever those things are. So a homeowner's policy has its own personal liability coverage, which is what we're talking about. But then it also has its dwelling protection, which is separate from the liability.
So another question came up. So when you get an umbrella policy, is that to help cover these liability expenses across different types of policies?
Yeah, great question. So a personal umbrella policy is an excess liability policy. So it goes above and beyond the underlying policies. So typically, when you have an umbrella policy, think of it like an umbrella, right? You're under the umbrella, and what goes under the umbrella would be your home and auto. And so the home and auto each have their own liability limits. So in the example we have on the spreadsheet, you have $100,000 liability limit per person. And if there was an accident where somebody exceeded the $100,000, then the umbrella excess liability would come in over top of that. So let's say, heaven forbid it happened, but let's say there was $1 million liability claim and your underlying limits was $100,000 from the auto. Your auto would pay out 100, and then your umbrella would carry 900,000 to cover the $1 million. So then the personal umbrella policy is an excess. So then it would pick up for anything the underlying one couldn't, when it exceeded its limit, then the umbrella kicks in. So great question. Usually the umbrella comes in when the underlying limits of the home and or auto aren't sufficient enough to cover your assets. Then you throw an umbrella on there to make sure that we have that protection in place.
Okay, great. One last question then. Are there common exclusions or limitations when it comes to liability that we should be aware of?
This is my lawyer response. It all depends. So it's the thing is from exclusions and things like that. Typically, it depends on how it's written. So in this situation, we're talking about personal liability. So that means in a personal setting. So if you're driving your car to and from work and it's not a work vehicle, specifically for work, and something happens in your personal car, then that liability limits and the umbrella from a personal umbrella policy, right? That all is going to be paid out. If it fell under a commercial use or something along those lines, then depending on how that falls will dictate where and how that gets paid out. But for what we've been talking about, we're talking about personal things. So that's kind of on a personal side rather than a commercial side. Does that help answer the question?
I believe so.
Perfect.
Well, Adam, those are all the questions we had. Thank you so much. This is obviously an important part that all of us that have insurance need to understand and make sure we've got adequate coverage. If you don't have a good insurance agent, I urge you to reach out to Adam Noll at the Adam Noll Agency. And then join us next month on June 5th. Kiera Lavelle with Howard Hanna is going to answer all your questions about real estate. You can register for that event on the website at bbbng.org. And if you want to join us in person, we meet the second and fourth Tuesdays at the Northern Ohio Business Center in Cobblestone Square in Sheffield Village at 11:30. And we'd love to have you be a guest there as well. So thanks for coming, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.